I was sitting at my desk one of those golden sunny fall mornings, late 2016, when I saw a text come in from a friend. It said, "Do you want to go to Standing Rock with me?" Never thought about going to Standing Rock. I'd seen the images going by on social media and Indian reservation in North Dakota, where people were protesting the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline over Lakota Treaty lands and under the Missouri River. It hadn't once occurred to me to go. So I texted back, yes. Oh, what else do you do when a doorway to another world just materializes in your living room? We arrived at Standing Rock late in the afternoon of November 20th. At that time, there was somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 people spread across 3 camps, ramshackle villages of tents, teepees, camper vans, and structures huddled together to try and ward off that fierce North Dakota wind. It's chilly out. The air is thick with wood smoke, and the sun is starting to drop below that long northern plain horizon. I'm carrying some of the food that we bought in our car to a tent when a pickup truck goes by. It's loaded with people, and one of the guys in the back has a megaphone. He's shouting, "Action on the bridge, now! They're taking the bridge, let's go!" 3 more pickup trucks. People are running around, grabbing backpacks, radios, barking instructions at each other. I have no idea what's going on. I feel afraid, and I'm wondering what on earth I'm doing here. So I go into the tent, and I help them crank up the wood stove, carry in water, and start preparing food. And within an hour, they're coming back from what had become the front lines. One young man came in, he could barely walk. He was literally, his clothes were frozen solid. He'd been doused with a water cannon. It's 20 degrees out. His ears hurting. A sound grenade had gone off way too close to his head. He had concussion symptoms for weeks after that. And they keep coming back. They're cold and they're wet and they're tired and some of them are bruised. And as I minister to them, I listen to their stories. And my mind begins to form an image of what's happening up there on Blackwater Bridge that cold, dark night. On the north side of the bridge, there's a large group of militarized police, full riot gear. They're armed with guns with rubber bullets, water cannons, pepper spray, and sound grenades. And they're using their weapons at will. And on the south side of the bridge is a ragtag group of water protectors. Some of them are wearing feathers, some of them are wearing camo. Many of the women have long skirts. And they're armed with banners that they've painted themselves. And they say things like, "Water is life, Mini Wakoni. Defend the sacred, and you can't drink oil." And as I float in and out of sleep that night, waiting to see if anyone else is coming back, it occurs to me that this is not a protest. This is a standoff between 2 worldviews. One worldview that holds that it's just and it's right to use taxpayer money to defend the interests of a private corporation, and that the rights of that corporation to make a profit are higher law than the rights of the people on the planet that are bearing the costs, and that it's perfectly reasonable to use force against unarmed people. And on the other side, a worldview that thinks that water is a sacred thing, that all life is a sacred thing, and that we're held together by a web of life, and that each of us has the right to a healthy and a clean environment, and that prayer, love, and ceremony are the greatest forces of change on the planet. These 2 worldviews were facing each other that night on Blackwater Bridge, and they continue to do so around the globe. One, the dominant narrative of our modern culture. The other, an ancient worldview that is now re-emerging as we face the reckoning point of the fact that endless economic growth is not possible on a finite planet. The Dakota Access Pipeline was eventually built, but the actions of those water protectors continue to ripple out across the globe as thousands of people went home with a new view. Many people came back here to Asheville determined to make a difference. And it's one of those ripples that I'm excited to share with you today. So Standing Rock was about protecting the water, and it was about the rights of Indigenous people in this country. What if we added to that the rights of the Missouri River herself? What if our French Broad River had rights? What if the Amazon rainforest right now on fire had legal standing? What would that do for this work of ecological protection? And what would it do for that union of those two worldviews? Because it is a union that we need, no longer one dominating the other. We need a weaving together, a braiding of the wonders of modern science and technology, and the deep recognition that all life is sacred, and it deserves the right to evolve and to flourish. I am part of a global rights of nature movement, and I see this as one of those threads that's doing the weaving together of these two worldviews. And it's a legal strategy that could go a long way to us saving what's left of our precious planet. The Missouri River doesn't have any rights, but the Wanganui River does. The Wanganui River is in the land we now call New Zealand. And at this point in time, all 180 miles of her are no longer owned by humans. The Maori, who are indigenous to this land, fought long and hard for this to happen. And finally, in 2018, a board of trustees was established to protect and enforce the rights of the Wanganui River. Half of those trustees are Maori, and half of those trustees are colonial New Zealanders. That's a union. And in their formation documents, they wrote it in both Maori and English, in recognition that there are concepts in each language that cannot be adequately translated to the other. That's a weaving. The rights of nature were written into the Ecuadorian National Constitution in 2008. So now in Ecuador, you can file suit against corporate polluters on behalf of a river or a forest. And people are doing so and they're winning. Rights of nature laws have been passed in countries as diverse as India, Nepal, Colombia, Bolivia, Sweden, the UK, and even here in the US. In March of this year, Lake Erie was given rights. This happened through a citizen-led ballot initiative in Toledo, Ohio. It's currently being contested in court, which is how our laws get changed. These are some of the stepping stones that I see bringing these two worldviews together. But when I talk to people about the rights of nature, most people have never heard of it, and I wonder why. And I think in part it's due to some deeply held cultural assumptions that have been inadequately challenged for 2,000 years or so. The first of those is that humans are somehow separate and better than the rest of the natural world. This one we can trace in the written record to around about 300 BCE, the time of Aristotle, but I think it goes way back before then. And it holds that we as a species are we're different from all of this stuff, this natural world stuff out here. And we're much better. And it's here for our use and for us to do with what we will. And we prove our superiority to nature by dominating and controlling it with our technologies. This is not just a philosophical notion. The EPA recently estimated that on average, Americans spend 93% of our time indoors. That leaves a meager 7% of our time to be in touch with the more than human world. 7. It's so deeply embedded in our psyches, this separation from nature, that we went and encoded it into our legal system. And it is in this country now legal, and in fact culturally idealized, to own pieces of the natural world. We call it property, which comes from the Latin root pro privo, for the individual, pro privo. How many of you own a piece of land? Do you consider the trees on that land to be yours? It's only been since about the 1500s that this idea of individual property ownership emerged into European law. It happened in Britain. There's still many places on in the planet that it doesn't exist. But the Europeans took this idea and we transplanted it over here to the Americas. And now every square foot of this continent is owned by humans. whether it's the government, an organization, or individuals, every square foot. If we want to start looking at how to weave together those two worldviews, we really need to consider how we see ourselves in relation to the rest of the natural world, and what it means to own pieces of her. Now, the Rights of Nature movement also has its own assumptions. I'm going to share with you 3 of those today. The first is that all life is interconnected and interdependent. This is not a new idea. Many indigenous cultures have held this since before time. And it says that every single thing that we do impacts everything else, whether seen or unseen. And that we are all held together by a web of life, from which we can never be separated, even by death. And modern science is winding its way back to this in a field of inquiry often known as complexity science or complex systems thinking, which studies a wide range of phenomena from the economy, human family relationships, world trade patterns, the way that fish move when they school together. And one of its major tenets is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, which means you cannot take an individual and meaningfully study them in separation from the system from which they have emerged. So in this view, a tree is not a single solitary thing standing there with its roots and trunk and branches. A tree is a node in a very complex network of relationships of exchange. It's exchanging gases with the atmosphere. It's exchanging nutrients with other trees through its underground mycelium networks. It's exchanging calories, little creatures that come and eat its leaves and its nuts and seeds. And it's exchanging functions as it holds together the soil and it cools the planet for us all. We humans are no different. So if all life is interconnected, then when we start talking about rights, it doesn't make sense to talk about an individual or even an individual species. We need to be looking at the bigger picture. The Endangered Species Act of 1973 has gone a long way to helping us save from extinction many of our most vulnerable species, the whales, for instance. But it has fallen short of recognizing that any species is held in existence by a web of relationships. So for a whale who depends on fish for food, and those fish are stuck behind a dam somewhere in a river, or her stomach is so full of plastic that she cannot absorb the nutrients from those fish anyway. And the noise of our ships day and night is so deafening and so distressing to her that she cannot effectively communicate with the rest of her pod. Then our curbing of human hunting is not going to be enough to save those whales from extinction. The Rights of Nature movement holds that ecosystems have the right to persist. They have the right to regenerate their vital cycles and the right to flourish and to evolve without human interference. The Rights of Nature movement also holds that it is us humans that carry the responsibility of protecting the more than human world. We are tool makers, we always have been. We've created over evolutionary time such things as the stone axe, leather shoes, writing, the internet, airplanes, heart transplants. And we've wiped out any species that may be getting in the way of our existence. And we've crawled our way up to the top of the food chain. And here we are, we made it. We're the planet's apex predator. And for the first time in the history of this Earth, we, one species, sit here very comfortably with our fingers poised over the red button. We have the ability to wipe out the entirety of life on Earth. With a species extinction rate of somewhere close to 150 species per day, and the hottest year on record all being in the last 5 years, and this one looking like it's going to join them, it seems like now is the time for us to stop acting like an apex predator, for us to stop being the planetary schoolyard bully, and to step into our responsibility as the most powerful species on Earth. When I came back from Standing Rock, there were circles of people in Asheville sitting here asking, how do we bring this home? One of the things the organizers up there had asked of all of us. In one of those circles, I met a man named Tyler Garrison. He'd previously raised $40,000 and sent 3 tractor-trailer loads of gear up to Standing Rock for the winter. He and I got to talking. We fell in love, and we created a nonprofit called Community Roots. We started working with a group of environmental lawyers out of Pennsylvania called the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. CELDEF have been instrumental in the global rights of nature movement. They were involved in the Ecuadorian Constitution rewrite. They're heavily involved in the Lake Erie case. And they've written and passed somewhere like 200 community bills of rights across the country, many of which contain rights of nature clauses. Tyler and I worked closely with CELDEF to write Asheville's Climate Bill of Rights. This is a local ordinance, so it's a city-level law that requires the city to get to 100% renewable energy by 2030, citywide. It establishes the rights of the citizens that live here to a healthy environment, and that be higher law than the rights of a corporation to make a profit. And it establishes the rights of nature. Community Roots is running a citizen-led ballot initiative to get the Climate Bill of Rights on the ballot in March, so we can all vote on it. I don't know what it's going to take, this weaving. It's going to take decades, maybe longer. It's certainly going to take us questioning our own assumptions, both in private contemplation and in community conversation. Standing Rock changed my life. I know it changed Tyler's life. And in February of 2018, Tyler was killed in a motorcycle accident. But the love and the energy that he poured into this work is amplified every single time one of us that recognizes that all life is a gift. It's given to us. And every single time we acknowledge the preciousness of the time that we have right now to step firmly into our roles as protectors of this beautiful planet.